Welcome to the Journey to Multifamily Millions monthly webinar. I'm Tim Little, founder and CEO of ZANA Investments. We help high net worth individuals diversify their portfolios and get competitive returns by passively investing in multifamily real estate. As some general housekeeping rules, again, please keep yourself muted when not speaking. If at any point you do have a question, please just drop it in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand during the Q&A portion, either your digital hand or your real hand, and I'll go ahead and call on you so that you can go ahead and ask your question. And just so everyone knows, this will be recorded and I'll send it out as soon as it's available. James, will we be able to get the slides for this?
Sure. Yeah, I'll send them to you.
Okay, great. Then we'll make sure that we send those slides out when we send out the link to the recording as well. Finally, I encourage here to put your contact information in the chat. You know, a big part of this is not only coming and learn a few things, but to chat with others and get to know some other folks in the real estate business. So with that out of the way, I'm excited to get into the presentation. Tonight we have James Stratton with us, who brings a wealth of experience in commercial real estate. He has a Bachelor of Business Administration and a Master's in Real Estate Finance, and has put them both to good use in his work focusing on urban planning, real estate development and redevelopment, as well as real estate portfolio creation and optimization. James, I know you've seen a ton of deals and advise others on real estate investments, and sometimes have to probably save them from themselves. So I'll stop talking now and let you introduce yourself a bit more and get into the presentation.
All right. Appreciate that, Tim. Thank you for having me here. Like Tim said, I'm James Stratton. I'm with OTG Realty Advisors. We're a brokerage out of both Texas and Florida, who primary focuses on buyer and investors. And we put together syndication packages and help people analyze those packages from an analysis point of view. And so I talked to Tim, I guess it's been a couple of weeks ago, and I was listening to what he was saying. And of course, a lot of my background is all the numbers. But the reality of the situation is that it all comes down to people. So people make deals. And so with the focus of today's discussion is going to be about the 5 ways good multifamily deals go bad. Really focuses on the people in it. So if you notice on my screen here, I have the bouncing balls of happy people, because that's how people really start out. When they go searching for a multifamily deal, it's all exciting. It's really exciting to find the deals, try to acquire the properties and run them. And that's when the smiles sometimes start changing. So we're going to talk about the different focuses that we should have when we start looking at commercial real estate. Now, I tend to look at things from a finance point of view, but so I always leave that caveat. There's a lot of legalese in multifamily. So if you hear something in here that sounds kind of strange, always talk to your lawyer. So that's a safe thing to do. So I'm also retired Air Force. I spent 22 years in the Air Force, traveled the world, worked on AWACS most of my career. And then after I retired, I went into real estate from there. All right, so let's get started on this real quick. So we're going to start out here. The number one thing that causes, I'm going to try to see if I can shrink this screen because I can't see what's going on my side over here. Not beginning with the end in mind can lead to deals going bad. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the slide and the bullets on there, and we're going to try to add some examples to each one of these so we can give some context to it. But if you think about it, it's real easy to get into the deal, but you also need to figure out who's going to be the person who picks it up when you go to sell it at the reversion period or the selling period. So you always start out with that almost exactly at the same time you're looking at the property itself. So as a general partner, sponsor, promoter, however you're looking at that, you need to always begin with the end in mind. And so we need an end game, because without one, deals are more likely to go bad. An exit strategy is essential to make sure a deal doesn't go bad. It provides a timeline and helps you stay focused on your goals. And your exit strategy should be flexible enough to accommodate market conditions. And by the way, think about what we're going through today, right? So for the first time in a long time, real estate's pretty volatile, especially commercial real estate. If we go back to 2008, when the residential side was in crisis, it was predicted that commercial would get there in 2011. And because the market took proper actions, they stayed that off, and we never experienced it. Not like we were supposed to. But today, it hit everybody with surprise. And so for the first time, volatility is a big issue when we start looking at multifamily deals. And so we can't rely on things in the past to help us decide today. We have to do a much better job. As an example, there was a lady I spoke to not too long ago. She was her first time to really be a general partner in a deal. So basically, she was money chasing a deal. And when I talked to her, I said, you really need to, before you start settling in on a plan, you need to start figuring out who's going to buy this property when it's over with. And you don't want to be the one standing up when the music stops. And unfortunately, her first deal, she didn't listen to that, and she ended up buying an eightplex, but she never evaluated or never figured out that the person who had it before took 7 years to sell it to her. So the holding period was 5 that she was doing. So it was like 2 years past her holding period. So you can imagine that was a situation that didn't work out so well for her. And using these timelines also help us keep things in check. So we know at certain points that we have a decision point to make. And Tim's also in the Army, so I'm sure he remembers a lot of this as well. They have standard operating procedures that are like checklists, and we don't do things unless it checks off the list. And having the timeline is a checklist. And so that's part of that as well. All right, the second reason is failing to invest in the right people talent can lead to deals going bad. Real estate is a team sport, and failing to have the right people on your team can create some real issues and be costly. Multifamily real estate is expensive and takes a lot of teamwork. In fact, Kevin and I were talking about this earlier today, that he likes just simply going and finding the investors, and he can do the underwriting, but it's not his thing. And he trusts the underwriter to go do the job for him. And so this is part of using that teamwork. And without the right team in place, deals are likely to fall through. And when they do, losses can be great. And part of that reasoning is, unlike the stock market. So the stock market, millions of trades happen every single day. It's referred to as a strong, efficient market. Real estate is a weak, efficient market, which means there's not as many transactions that happen each day. And the real cost to that market is agency cost, the people who actually take part in the transaction with you, and information. It's very expensive to get, and it's very costly when you don't get the right. So I always like to tell people that when you're investing, it doesn't matter if you're investing in the stock market or the real estate market, speed kills, but for very different reasons. Here, you can't move fast enough in the stock market because machines are going to outpace you. You can't move faster than the machine. And in real estate, speed kills because people don't take the right amount of time. And they don't necessarily produce the right team of people to help them do that work when they try to do it all themselves. They do all that heavy lifting themselves. By the way, anybody other than Don and Kevin old enough to remember mimeograph machines? I chime in on that one. I don't know why that came to my mind, but all of us remember being in the 8th grade, and the teacher turned around and said, "Hey, go off and make some copies." And everybody raised their hand real quick to go make copies of the mimeograph machine because of the alcohol that was in that. But when
that's where the girls were hanging out, actually.
That's where they were. And you sit there and run that drum through, right? And so one of the things I find on the finance side, I'm trying to use this as an example, is it's not uncommon for me to find a promoter who is rushing through the system, and they don't necessarily put together the financials correctly. That's the last thing on their mind. But this is a financial investment. And it reminds me of a mimeograph machine, because oftentimes these guys will go get a spreadsheet offline. Dr. Google will give them a spreadsheet, and they don't know where that thing came from. They don't know how the calculations are doing. They don't even really understand the financial model they're looking at. They're just running it through that mimeograph machine. And all of us remember that when you get the first one in there, it comes out crisp, and it starts getting really fuzzy and unreadable as you start getting that drum going. And that's the way this works. So people start passing around spreadsheets, and they really don't know what's really going on in those spreadsheets. And this is where you need an actual finance professional as one of the people on your team to help you with that, because they truly understand what's going on behind the spreadsheets themselves, or the pro formas. So some of the people that are typically found on a team would be obviously the promoter, but you're going to want people like your inspector, your architect, your lender, your lawyer. Obviously, you got to have a lawyer on this. Who else is going to put together your private placement memorandum and your operating agreement? I hope you're not doing it on your own. No, I wouldn't. So you want to have those people involved in it, but there's a whole series of people When I typically at limited partners and looking at deals that general partners put out, and this is kind of a freebie, one of the things they really look at is legacy. So who's going to take over if, God forbid, something happens to the promoter or the person responsible, the GP? The unfortunate thing happens. Who's going to take over for them? So we always look for that kind of thing. So the other things we're going to look at is the strength, meaning the resume of who's on that team that's doing the promoting. Do they have the right people on there? Not too long ago, I looked at a multifamily deal that's coming out of Central Texas, and the gentleman who put together the financials for him was a CPA. And while that was fine, he really didn't understand the deal he was looking at. And it didn't take long to look at the financials and realize he was wrong in a lot of areas. And so that deal got passed over. And a lot of times, limited partners just simply won't tell you why they passed you over. And that's a shame, because if you have a good deal, you want to make sure it goes through. All right, so this is a big one. Not getting your financial house in order can lead to the deals going bad.
Hey, James, can I slow you down a little bit? Because we're burning through these, and I just want to make sure that we have time, because what I'm afraid of is that if we get through all of them, that people will have forgotten each one in case they had questions on each section. So I'm gonna rewind you a bit, and
Okay.
on that first one, begin with the end in mind. Understand what you're talking about there in terms of having an exit strategy. It is the main takeaway, it sounds like, and I would say you should probably have more than one exit strategy in mind, right?
Absolutely.
You have
Absolutely.
you have what's basically your best case scenario, which you might even hold it in your hip pocket, but then what you're telling to investors is your worst, I don't want to call it worst case, but more likely, more conservative exit strategy. So a lot of times on these deals, what you'll see is, a sale, or you'll see a refi in year 3 and a sale in year 5. But a lot of time that investor knows that if they can sell in year 3 and, get that speed of money going and get that investment back to those investors with the appropriate returns, then they're probably going to sell in year 3, right? Say you're getting a 2x on that investment.
Yep.
I'd rather get that 2x in 3 years than 5. So while you need to address the needs of your investors, whatever the reasons they're in it for, be it cash flow or long-term investment, take that under consideration for sure. But you're going to look at that deal and you're going to say, hey, we're either going to refi in year 3, or if market conditions are appropriate, then we'll sell in year 3. And so you just make that clear, I think, to limited partners, passive investors, that we're not held to that, so that if we do have to hold on to it for 2 or 3 more years, we have the correct loan or, whatever the case may be in place to do that if need be.
Yeah, so I can appreciate what you're saying there. So one of the things that you brought up is the 3 tenets of finance, which is the magnitude of cash, timing of cash, and risk of cash. And so one of the things as a general partner you will always want to do is you're always wanting to operate in the best interest of not only the entity that you're in, but the LPs that you represent, because you have a fiduciary duty to them. And so it may be, like you said, that you may see the cash flows are looking at as such, whether you should sell it or continue operating it, as you've talked about, based on those cash flows. And that's also going to be found in your PPM and your operating agreement as to what that capability is. From a limited partner's point of view, keep in mind that what Tim was talking about is that the GP is usually in charge of making those strategic decisions. That's another reason why you want to make sure that you have the right people on that team that will make those right decisions. But as an LP, you're going to be in that investment for a while. It's not like the stock market where I can go and buy a share right now and turn around 15 minutes later and sell it. I can't even option it. But in this investment, you're going to be in it for a while. So you got to do we always talk about doing your due diligence. That goes without saying. What we're really talking about here are the people involved and how they go about it.
Yeah, and Steven just asked a great question. He said, how do you accurately predict who your buyer will be in 3 to 5 years from now? And I think there's a couple of different, ways to look at that. I think there's a very broad way of looking at it. So you can say, hey, my intention is to kind of market this to institutional level investors. So, say you're going to take that B-class property and you're going to rip it down to the studs, make it new again, and put in all these amenities and make it so that it's more attractive to those institutional type investors who are looking for very stable, A-class properties. Then that's your business plan. And so you, like you said, you have the end in mind. You know that you want to make it attractive and pitch it to those institutional investors. Whereas if you have regular value add property, your business plan might be such that, hey, we have make the number simple, right? We have 100 unit property and we're going to renovate 60% of those units. So we'll renovate 60 of those units, thereby leaving some meat on the bone for the next value add investor who wants to purchase that property, because they could say, hey, it's still value add to me because I got those other 40 units to renovate, to update, and still drive up the value of that asset.
Yeah, so I can appreciate what you're saying there. So, well, I think what we were getting at on that is that you begin by finding exactly what you're talking about ahead of time before you've even started looking at the property you have. Because when you know who that end buyer is going to be, or who you have planned out, 2 or 3, 4, whoever you're going to court, they will have already told you what they're looking for. And so you're building that plan to meet their goals. So they're ready to pick it up. It's like passing off a baton. They're willing to pick it up right where you passed it off.
Yeah, so it's not so much like an individual per se. I mean, if you got one of those lined up 3 to 5 years out, then good on you. But it's more the types of folks that you'll be looking to pitch to. That's at least how I think of it. I don't know if anything else.
Likely, if you got somebody like that, they're going to do it right now. They're not going to do it years from now. So not many of us run around with that kind of money in our back pocket.
Sure.
All right. So thank you for slowing me down here. What do I need to go back through here? And I think we talked a little bit more about that timeline, didn't we? And we're talking about, hey, when you step into it, I already want to have all these people lined up that are my potentials, so that when the time comes, whether it's that 3-year mark, maybe you turn around at that point for finance and you say, okay, I've got a great person who can step in right now, but you need to have that next card ready to deal. So, and that's what that purpose is. And of course, right up, a great example of this is something that Kevin and I talked about today. And maybe you and I talked about that too. And we had that entity that wanted me to look at their cash flows because their loan was coming due in March. And they were not capitalized in such a way to be able to take advantage of the really good job they had put in their loan together, because they didn't take care of the property to a point where they could, basically they were upside down. So they were going to lose that property. And it's an unfortunate thing because they didn't use a timeline to help make sure all their stuff was lined up at the right time. In fact, you talked about that too, when we were talking about the properties that you're working on, that your job is to be on the phone with with any contractor on there, and you're keeping them up to date on the task at hand. And so that's what that timeline's about. And we talked about this finding the right team members involved in this, right? And I think we kind of talked a little bit about that too. And even in the first step, it kind of went into that, is who is on your team and what does their resume actually look like? Do they actually have the background necessary to take care of the job? Look, I see them all the time where people will go online and they're trying to get a full financial analysis done for $200. Do you really think that you're going to get a full financial analysis done for $200? Especially if they're turning around and asking for $100,000. So there's not a whole lot of effort going into that. So when I look at this from even a general partner's point of view, I want to see who's coming on my team and what their qualifications are. Do they have the right pedigree? Do they have the right experience? Or are they just pretending?
So let me ask you, when you're working on behalf of a limited partner, how do you go about vetting those general partners?
So I'll actually talk to the general partner and ask them who's on their team and look them up and do my own vetting as to whether or not the person is, if it's properly filled out. I'll ask them, hey, you may have, I think you need this on your team. And they may turn around and say, well, we've already addressed this. This person is a contractor for us that will step in at the right time, and that satisfies it, right? So they don't necessarily, when you start talking about smaller investments, you're not going to be able to afford to have all these people on your team full time. Unlike the stock market, where there's companies that operate on the stock market do exactly the same thing. Well, they can afford it, but you can't. So you're going to need to do things ad hoc, but you got to have access to these people. And so when I get a hold of you and say, who's the person doing the inspection on your property? I want to make sure that person's actually qualified to do the inspection on your property.
Makes sense.
Yep. Same thing with a lawyer. You want to make sure that, well, lawyers typically don't have this problem because they know that they only practice in the areas what they're good at. So that you won't usually find somebody who's a car wreck attorney, for example, doing syndication that's just outside their field, and they just won't do it. So they'll just refer you to somebody else. And by the way, a good professional will do that, right? If you get to an accountant who doesn't deal with multifamily, they'll just tell you, hey, I don't deal with that, but here's somebody else that does. But you
Yeah,
always go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely right about your point that, GPs have to vet their co-GPs too. When
Right.
you're partnering with other folks that maybe you haven't done deals with before, they check out on paper and stuff like that. Certainly vet them, look at their deal history, but at the same time, just stay alert because there's just varying degrees of experience and you don't want to assume that they'll know something that they may not know, because we all know what happens when you assume, especially when you're talking, C compliance with a 506B and stuff like that, because it's going to fall on you anyways. So just make sure that everyone is on the same sheet of music and do not make any assumptions that people know not to post things on social media.
Oh, yeah. Good point. I've seen that too. Get you in trouble because you're advertising when you shouldn't be.
Correct.
So yeah, it's a good point that's there. Same thing with I always tell people that when you get into an investment, your best partner is a silent partner, and that's the bank. And so if the bank is struggling to get into your deal, then as a limited partner, you should probably be looking at why. So it should be harder for a limited partner to vet a deal than the bank, because the limited partner actually has less rights if something goes wrong. The bank's going to get your property one way or the other. They're going to get their money. But the limited partner is the second to last to get their money. And it needs to be harder to get it. All right. We already talked about this here. Are we good enough to get back to our financing on the house? So Tim's being my timekeeper.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
All right. So just because you're an accredited investor does not mean that every deal is available to you. And you really need to take an inward look at yourself and determine whether or not this deal is a good deal for you to get into. Can you maintain things, right? Let's get to that part of it. So if you're already, it's just like gambling. Don't ever gamble money you can't afford to lose. And it's the same thing with investing. Don't ever invest money that I need today. Because when you're with all the benefits associated with being involved in investments in multifamily, the detriment is that you're in it for the long haul. You can't just jump in and out. And so you need to make sure that you can deal with the long time of not having that cash available to you immediately. And in fact, depending on what kind of deal you have, you certainly can't get out of it in less than a year. But depending on what kind may determine whether or not you can get out of it at all. You may be able to, if the operating agreement allows, you may be able to sell your unit off maybe a year from now or whatever, but don't count on it. So always assume that you're going to be in it. And furthermore, it's very possible that there might be a cash call where now you got to have more money going into it and you really didn't count on that. And this is probably more so true today than just even a year ago. So many more deals right now, their debt service ratios are so low that in order to get the reset taken care of, they're going to have to put more money into the deal. They're going to go right to the limited partners to get it. And so a great example of something not to do is talk to a guy. He's out of Florida. He's new to investing, which is where a lot of us are. A lot of us are brand new to investing that get into it in the beginning. And they get their information from a variety of sources. They'll get their information maybe from family members or maybe even some friends, or they'll go to the internet. That's where a lot of people get their information from, or they'll go to a seminar. And in this particular guy got brought into a seminar. And unfortunately, he went through a funnel process and he ended up paying $40,000 to go through a training course. Then he paid $30,000 for a database that everybody in the world had. And then he paid $5,000 for a website to be designed for him. And so we got $75,000 into this thing, right? And he put it all on a credit card. This was a gentleman that should never have been involved in this kind of investing at all, because his only source of cash was his credit card. And when the real deal came along, he just wasn't able to do anything. And it's an unfortunate deal for him. And those are the things we want to avoid when we talk about getting your financial house in order. And we talked about that. So we want to make sure we have enough cash reserves to make sure we can handle any disaster that might come down the road. And especially if you have a portfolio that's all in one area, you want to make sure you got your portfolio spread. And that way you don't have to run into the risk of it. All right. Now, this is more of an area for you, Tim. One of the things we want to talk about is making sure you use all the financial tools available to you. And so, Tim, I think you deal more with the 401ks and the self-directed IRAs, don't you?
Yeah, and this really just goes to, making sure that the deal happens, right? There's, I don't know, something ridiculous like $5 trillion in Ks out there. And some of that is self-directed and some of that can be put into self-directed accounts. And people just have a lot more money than they realize. So, as you're going out there, you're raising on deals. A lot of people think that this isn't for them because they don't have 100,000 sitting in the bank without realizing that orphaned 401k that they had from that company that they worked at for 20 years can be transferred over into a self-directed retirement account, to whereas they could use that money as they wish. And I would recommend that they use it on real estate and they can do it passively. It's just another one of those things that a lot of people don't realize is an option. And if you're the syndicator and you're not taking advantage of that or educating people on that fact, then you're doing yourself a disservice. And, you may be preventing deals from happening just based on not having that cash flow coming in.
Well, and to your point, you were talking about having these reserves of cash in different places. All of us have things like Netflix accounts and money in all these different subscriptions, and we don't realize that we don't always use those things all the time, right? So we're not really efficient with it. One of the things, the products I create is something that's an optimized portfolio of properties, and I deal with hundreds of these. And one of the things that this product knows and does is it tells you just how much money you should have as far as your equity in each property type or each property itself, and how much your net present value will be in that property. So why is that important? Well, let's say, for instance, you've got two properties, right, that you're looking at. And you have $100. What is you something simple? You got $100. Do I put $50 in each one? Well, likely not, right? So what you want to do is take a look and see what your equity distribution should be. But let's say, for instance, that you've evaluated it. Well, before you evaluated it, you did put 50 in each one. Well, unfortunately, if it turned out that you needed $40 in one and 60 in the other, one of them is embargoed. It's going to take some effort to get that money out. And so one of the things you want to do is from time to time, look and see how much equity you have in these projects and make sure they're optimized to where you can free up that cash for other deals. And so when we talk about things like when we go in there to raise capital from limited partners, you may have people who actually have more money than others. That's another source. What we call, from a raise point of view, you may end up having somebody who is what we call a first in investor and a last in investor. And they may have exactly the right equity that you need to fit your deal, like a jigsaw puzzle. And theirs might be a little bit different setup and something called a side that would help them get into the deal and get your deal across the timeline or the threshold. And those are some of the things we want to look at as far as using all those resources to your advantage. Bring them all to bear. Because the more control you have over your investment, the more likely that deal will go through and not go bad on you.
Yeah, and 1031s is another one, right? They're a little more complicated because then you get into the tenant in common structure.
Right.
But it can be done, and it's a source of money that needs to be allocated very quickly oftentimes, because these people are under the gun when it comes to that timeline that they're beholden to as part of that 1031 exchange.
Well, that goes back to what we talked about earlier about beginning with the end in mind again, right? So usually when you're representing a person who is selling a piece of property, a good broker will have identified the next properties for 1031 really quick. Well, this is also true of a person who is a GP or a sponsor. They will be in the market looking for somebody who is getting ready, their property is getting ready to sell, and they can jump in there real quick and say, hey, we're going to identify these properties that you can use as a tick. It is more complicated, and this goes back to using your attorney again, because there's just more rules involved in getting a tick involved in a syndication.
Yep.
Okay, number 5, not having a well-defined process and system in multifamily acquisitions can lead to deals going bad. That is so true. You got to have a checklist. And you don't ever deviate from it. Don't be this person who's chasing butterflies. And so this happens quite a bit where a person looks over and says, well, I got this great deal to go look at. My Uncle Bob told me to look at, or whoever, and you're just chasing butterflies. You need to have a model put together ahead of time so that the market's not pulling from you, you're pulling from the market. And then you also have a checklist that you go through, a multiple step process in order to get to that deal. I always look at things from a standpoint of your due diligence period. And one of the things that always bothers me is when a GP looks over and says, I got a due diligence period of 30 to 60 days. Well, that tells me that you're operating in a seller's market. That means the seller has got you get involved in it, then all those bad things that happen with the weak markets, it goes south. I had a guy not too long ago. He's actually he's an Army guy. He was an Army vet, and he saved up a pretty good chunk of change. And I don't want to say too much there. I think his mother had passed away, and he had money from that to go invest. And so the deal ended up going bad because he didn't have his ducks in a row, and he didn't have all that checklist, and he got so emotionally charged about buying it and excited about it that he lost sight of what he really should be doing, and he lost his money. And it's an unfortunate thing. And like I said, before I cut out there, always put yourself in a position where you can just walk away from the deal. It's as simple as that.
Now, when you say lost his money, I think you need to dive a little bit deeper into what that means.
So because he wasn't experienced, and it goes back to understanding who's the pretenders and who's not, he invested money with people who were largely pretenders and the charlatans in the deal, and they just took his money and ran because he wasn't surrounded by people who could advise him well. And he just tried. He went out in the market and unfortunately got burned. And he should have just simply had the notion of walking away. And I guess that's what I'm driving home. If you see a deal that just doesn't smell right, walk. It's as simple as that. And don't get yourself in there.
Yeah, it probably falls into that category. If it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. Was it one of those?
Yeah. So one of the things I tell people too is do a comparative analysis of deals. So if you're looking at multiple syndications, look at the profitability index and whatever measure makes you happy. There's so many measures that are out there. Not any one of them is a magic bullet. The closest one I could think of that would be a magic bullet would be net present value. But even then, it's got its limitations. So use what makes sense to you. And then also don't be afraid to just simply ask for help. It's as simple as that. But compare those deals and make sure that since your money's locked up, it's going to give you the best return over that time period. What's your opportunity cost in that deal or deals? And so that's an area of concern for that.
Yeah. And I was going to say, just on that whole, the dirty little secret of the business, like, honestly, there's not a huge range in between the returns as long as you're comparing like deals, right? Traditional value add to a traditional value add, they're going to have, an approximate range. And if you see anything that's a great deviation from that, like you said, if you look at, 5 deals from 5 different syndicators, they should be within a certain range. If anything is far outside of that, then
that's a red flag.
That it is a red flag. It doesn't mean they're doing necessarily anything nefarious, but there has to be a very specific set of circumstances that would cause those returns to be so far outside whatever the general range is.
And to your point, if you're doing nothing but value adds and that's what you're into, then you're comparing across that. Now, make sure that you're not prejudging it something where they maybe change the property type. So I think Kevin and I were talking about one of the things that's happening right now is that we're seeing people that are taking old hotels and converting those into apartments. And those serve a lot of functions. Well, that's going to be a redevelopment. And that redevelopment is going to have a lot different returns than a value add. So don't prejudge it. You need to know exactly what kind of property type you're looking at and what profile that should look like.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I say like properties, because yeah, you talk about build to rent, ground up development, you're going to have longer timelines, higher risk. So those rewards have to be commensurate
Huge
to that. It makes more sense if it's higher on that side.
So anytime we're looking, even from a finance point of view, we're always looking at here's the risk-free rate that's out there. But I need to have a premium put onto this project because all risk is broken up into two sections, what we call non-systemic risk and systemic risk. Systemic risk, I can't get rid of. There's no way to stop it. But non-systemic risk, I can diversify out. And when I'm dealing with properties, this goes back to that experience again. If I'm a multifamily operator, and now all of a sudden I'm expecting to be an office operator, while there's similarities, they're different from one another. For me to get into that deal, my risk premium is going to have to be higher because my experience level is lower. So, or I'm going to have to surround myself with people who have that experience. So it all comes back to that non-systemic risk. And I think the very last slide that was supposed to be up here was the bonus. And that bonus one that gets people in trouble is they don't take the time to make good decisions. And so they apply something called, in finance, refer to it as financial or behavioral finance. And they'll go out and they'll learn about a particular multifamily type of deal, for example, maybe that's what they're into. And all the research they do will back up what their belief system is. And so it's called confirmation bias. And they won't look for information that tells them the opposite, especially since real estate is highly local. It's so, if you're buying a piece of real estate right now, period, I don't care what type it is, and Fort Myers, you probably should be concerned. Oh, I see something popping up on the screen here. There we go. And so the other thing that they do is something called heuristics, which is this rule of thumb business. And the rules of thumb in investments, especially in real estate, will get you in trouble every time. So rules of thumb work very good when we're involved in things that we're very experienced at, that we do all the time. If I go out and go buy a loaf of bread, I'm not too worried about it. I've got my rule of thumb as to what I should do, what I'm looking for, and the value is so low that I really don't care. If I get home and I find it's a moldy piece of bread, it's not worth my time to jump in the car and drive back to the store and return it. I'm just going to throw it away. But you can't do that in real estate. So in real estate, you're in it for a while. So the concept here is you don't use these rules of thumb. They work in areas where you're very experienced at and you have very little time and the cost is not so high. They work against you the other way around. So if you have to make a snap decision, don't do it in real estate.
Yeah, I guess the only pushback that myself or others might give on rules of thumb is that it's a starting point. It's certainly not something that should be used as a final analysis. But
Yes.
when, if like you said, you have to get through 100 deals to find that diamond in the pile there, then you have to find ways to make your time more efficient. And one of the ways to do that is to use these rules of thumb to say, okay, it doesn't even fit within my rules of thumb, so garbage, next deal. And
Right.
that way, but then that's just a trigger. That's just a trigger to say, okay, now I need to dive even deeper onto this one. So yeah, it's just a way to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, whatever you want to use.
Or the other pushback is to use the right tools to begin with. And so again, if you're hiring people that are in finance, they're going to know the proper tools to use. I think we talked about that before, where I analyze about 300,000 properties in about 20 seconds. And that doesn't use a rule of thumb. That just uses good math to make those decisions. Not everybody has access to those kinds of tools. But, if you're going to go put a lot of your money, which is a large portion of what your assets are, into a project, you need to use better tools. And so heuristics are not a good way to make a final decision like we talked about.
Absolutely.
And that was the last one.
All right. Well, I know I've taken up a lot of the oxygen in this room, at least. So I want to open it up in case anyone had any questions on any of the material that you presented, and get some free consulting advice from you, since you probably charged for this stuff when working on behalf of especially limited partners, I would imagine.
Kevin, you out there? I know you got a question.
Yeah, I was, this could be for anybody in the group. Like you were talking earlier about, just proper underwriting. What are your thoughts like when you have bridge financing, right, versus agency debt? I would think like people on the agency side would be going through the underwriting more with like a fine tooth comb versus like, say, a bridge debt underwriter, because you know what they say, like bridge loans are like loan to own, and the agency side doesn't want the property back. So would you think that the underwriting on the agency side might be a little bit tighter?
So underwriting is always going to be tight anywhere you go, because each one of them has their own objective. So that bridge loan, in many cases, like that credit card loan. So it's usually going to be a higher interest. And usually the underwriters there, they don't want a bridge to nowhere. I hate to use that as a kind of, but they want to make sure that whatever the end result is going to be picked up. Their loan's going to get bought by the permanent loan. So that's what they're looking for. And so they're going to have their own underwriting criteria. Most of those bridge loans are private lenders. So they're going to be out there. It's harder for them to get their money back. So what they're going to be looking at is to make sure your deal is good and solid and you have something you're working on. So usually when you see these bridge loans, it's because they're working with an agency like a USDA or a Freddie Mac, whatever. And whatever the alphabet soup is for the government, because it takes them so long to get these things processed, and you still got a business to operate. So you got to have a bridge loan to get you from point A to point B. If your planning works out good, then you may not need a bridge loan. You've already started working on that long before it ever comes.
But if you're looking at it on the LP side, do you think you'd feel good, like not knowing enough about the underwriting, that it's already been done by maybe 2 or 3 different groups of people?
Well, I'd want to look, if I was representing the LP, I want to see those financials. I want to see the pro formas and the cash flow statements. And I want to look and see how that's affecting it. And remember, I don't know the GP1 who doesn't say, hey, if I reach a certain level, usually measured in an ARR, then I want 50-50. Well, I know that greed's going to take over and that GP is pushing for it, right? So I can't imagine a GP putting their own money at risk or their upside at risk. So hopefully they've done their job and done that too, but you should do your own looking. But I'm going to assume that the GP wants to make that extra money. They're highly incentivized to do it. Or they're going to get out.
Hey, I was going to add, this is Don Canada, that one of the things, James, you were mentioning earlier, I'd like you to expand on, is that there's pretenders and even more importantly, predators in every industry, and trying to weed these people out and identify them, especially with the age of the internet, and people can be whatever they appear to be on the internet without any creds. Could you expand on, even from identifying the investors, that say they're accredited investors, and until you get to the financials or the dance to figure that out. So can you tell me how you identify people quickly like that to, again, try to save time for everybody that's involved?
Well, to your point on this, Don, I mean, there's in fact, there's several. The FTC just got through getting quite a few lawsuits on some of these predators that are out there that are involved in multifamily deals. And the Federal Trade Commission actually got some judgments out of that. They did and I'll probably drop that, Tim, I'll drop that in the notes in there so you can see that. but they did a really good job of outlining what the predator's con game is. And it's a very simple thing. They invite people to a meeting to talk about everything you need to learn about real estate in an hour, which I don't know how you would do that. When they get you there, they assigned you a mentor, and it's really a salesperson, and they learn about your finances and get you to buy courses that ultimately lead to you spending lots of money on nothing. And so they'll have some of the same attributes to them. Like they won't talk a lot about the downside of a deal. In any deal, there's risk. There's just that. And Tim alluded to that a little bit earlier, that you always want to be, you may have you keep to yourself the really good outcome, but you always want to tell your investors what the possible downside can be. And that way they're aware of it and they can plan, be honest. That's all there is to it. And so one of the things that Don has identified is the pretenders will oftentimes are just dishonest, and you get that feeling. But some people just can't sense that feeling. So it's the system that they use of funnels. They get you to come through their system. And unfortunately, their deals just go south, and that money is gone from the investment pool. And if there's anything we need in real estate, it's good investors coming into the investment community and making sure they're educated properly. I really applaud the Federal Trade Commission for doing the things that they're doing out there, because they're now catching up with a real problem that's taking advantage of people. That guy I told you about that did $75,000 on a credit card, that was a scam he got involved in. And he just really wanted to be involved in getting into real estate. He just was not qualified. Now, to the other side of that, Don, there's a form that the syndicator or the promoter will give you to get some information about your financials. You need to be able to prove that up. One of them is they want to make sure that you're an accredited investor versus a non-accredited or even a sophisticated investor. You really have to watch out for the ones that are non-accredited, because there's extra special rules that you have to take into account for them. But, that's really a declaration that the LP has made. It's a danger and a risk that GPs can take on, because even the LP could be a fraud. They may give you the money, but not really be an accredited investor. And if something happens down the road and an audit comes from the SEC and they find out, that's really not on the GP, that's on the accredited investor for lying, basically, is all it boiled down to. Don, did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you can get stuff from their CPA. That's one way to do it. Or I know one of the safest ways that people recommend is just having a third party verify that. There's services where you pay like $35 or whatever it is, $50 to have that person accredited, and they do all the verification. And that just gives you a little bit of extra top cover, from an SEC perspective, because it shows the SEC that you've done your due diligence by having them or you paying for that service to get the verification done. And that's what they're really looking for, I think, is the intent. Did you intend to have someone who was non-accredited act as, or did you, do your own due diligence and try to get that person accredited on paper?
Yeah.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, like I'm seeing a lot of deals lately where they're 506B deals, but they're only open to accredited investors. So it's almost like they're trying to avoid going through all that BS and taking the time to make sure they actually are accredited. And they're just letting themselves certify, which I think is crazy. But
well, you're right.
some-
It's setting themselves up for failure. That's for
Right.
certain. I mean, if I'm a GP, I would tell you that I probably wouldn't. I would also restrict. I mean, because there's going to be a point in time where there may be a cash call, and that non-accredited investor just won't be able to stick with you. And not to mention the extra reporting I have to do for that non-accredited investor. So in other words, there's too many ways out for a non-accredited investor. If you can get the deal across the line, you're better doing it with the proper LPs. So even from a GP's point of view, you want to do a much better job of vetting, just like Tim said.
Yeah, that's funny, Kevin. I hadn't heard that one, and I was confused at first, but once you explained it, I get it. I probably wouldn't do it myself, but I understand, there's less of that burden on there if they're self-certifying, if it's a B. But All right. Well, we're running against the clock here. It is 8:04, so we're hitting out about an hour. Hey, James, I really appreciate you coming on. Real quick, why don't you tell people where they can get a hold of you? This was a ton of information. I know I appreciated it, and we'll make sure it gets pushed out to everyone else. But let everybody know how they can get a hold of you, where they can get more information about you and your services.
Well, great. You can actually find me on LinkedIn. I'm right there. That's how we found each other. And I'm in several of the investing groups as well. So that's one way to connect up with me. I also have my website is www.otgrea.com. And you can find information there. For you guys, since it's a small group, my phone number is 817-225-5838. I certainly wouldn't do that if this was 1,000 people in this group, but so I appreciate the small group here, and I'll definitely give you my phone number. We covered, like you said, Tim, a lot, and we can't cover decades worth of information in an hour. So you just got to jump in there where you can.
Yep. All right. Well, again, appreciate it, James. Well, everyone who's still here, thank you for coming. I definitely appreciate you hopping on. Our next one will be on December 14th, where we'll have Dakota Brown and Alex Zapata from Franklin Street. They're going to be discussing the rapidly changing debt and equity markets. So there should be some definite good insights there too. And if you want more content in the meantime, I do host a weekly podcast called The Journey to Multifamily Millions. So please check that out and leave a review if you don't mind. I'll put a link to that in the notes just in case you need it. And again, connect with me on LinkedIn. Love having the conversation and talking to other real estate investors. Thanks again.
All right. Take care.